Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. And it's time to see what's making the headlines with the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha, and also the Times' Home Affairs editor, Matt Dathan. Hi to you both. They will both be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. And an angry Liverpool Echo responds to the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell and the news that the gunman and his accomplices drove off without helping her by asking the community, whose side are you on? The Eye points out that Olivia has become the youngest ever person in the UK to lose their life to the violence of organised crime. The Express calls her an innocent victim of the gun wars. This is the front of the Sun, gunned down at bedtime and left to die. The Mirror sums up the story in one word: unbearable. The Mail describes its own image of Olivia as a picture of innocence to shame lawless Britain. The Metro pleads, tell us who killed little Olivia. The Financial Times leads with the Chief Executive of Scottish Power telling ministers that a rescue plan to protect households from rising bills will need funding of more than £100 billion over 2 years. While the Telegraph reports that British diplomats are trying to persuade European governments to keep funding support for the war in Ukraine because they may prefer to prioritise the cost of living crisis. The Guardian has word of massive profits for the grain sector amid what it calls an unjust hunger crisis. And on a much different note, The Star has a story about the apparent benefits of, well, getting frisky. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch with us. And tonight we are joined by Sonia Sodha and Matt Dathan. Thank you both so much for joining us this evening. And as we look through all of those front pages, one story dominating all of them, it's unusual, isn't it, Sonia, to see one image of one person on pretty much every single paper apart from the Financial Times, and that's not a surprise given, you know, it's bent. Absolutely desperate story, random and needless death.
Well, it's the worst kind of tragic story. An innocent 9-year-old girl shot dead in Liverpool. More details have emerged during the day as a result of the police appeals. It sounds like, well, we know what happened was that there was, the police believe it was the result of an organised crime fight. Olivia's mother opened the door to see what was going on outside, the commotion. The person who was being pursued, the criminal who was being pursued by the person who eventually killed Olivia, saw a chink of light, forced his way into their house. Olivia's mother got shot in the course of that, and Olivia was fatally shot and later died. And the details of this are just, so awful. The person who was being pursued, his friends came and picked him up, and he kind of walked past Olivia, who was dying on the floor, and her mother, who was with her. And I just think it's just such a tragedy, and that's obviously why it's kind of on all the front pages, a totally senseless killing. And I think the Liverpool Echo's front page, it's very much an appeal. There are people who will know who killed Olivia and who were the people behind this. And this is a plea from the police that is being echoed by the Liverpool Echo, that whoever knows, they must come forward and they must speak to the police because her killers really do need to be brought to justice. And
those images of her, just about to go into year 5 at school, Sonia, and the Chief Constable of Merseyside Police, Serena Kennedy, saying that this is not the time for anyone who knows anything to stay tight-lipped. The utter horror of this story, the hope really is that whatever was going on that led to these events on the streets, that the criminal underworld in Liverpool will bring forward the person who did this.
Yes, that's right. And, it's sort of so unthinkable, I think, to think about, how this this could have happened to anyone. You sort of open the door, and the next thing you know, a scene is just playing out that is, your worst ever nightmare involving your own child. I mean, it's just, I think parents around the country, aunts and uncles, grandparents around the country will be just watching this with, just in horror, really. And it is the third. It's the third fatality in Liverpool in a week that, it's a third shooting, sort of fatal shooting, and the police think that these three killings may all be connected, but obviously this was of a 9-year-old girl. There was another innocent victim, a 28-year-old woman who was gunned down in her own home. The police think that was a case of mistaken identity, and a 22-year-old man lost his life. And I think that in a horrible echo of the past, this was 15 years to the day, Olivia's killing, to the day that Rhys Jones, a boy in Liverpool, was killed as a result of gangland killings back in Liverpool 15 years ago. So that's just kind of like another horrible twist to this, I think.
And let's bring in Matt. And Matt, as Sonia was talking about there, it's easy to say that these events are very rare and that we shouldn't be concerned. The people that aren't involved in gangs and in that kind of violence shouldn't be concerned about their own safety. But 3 shootings in a week of people who don't appear to have anything to do with such things will certainly concern a great many people, especially in the Liverpool area.
Yeah, that's right. And what we've heard across Sky News and other programmes today is from people in Liverpool, across Merseyside, really quite scared about letting their own kids and even their own family out of their own houses. It's quite a shocking incident that you open your own door to see what's going on in your own street, and your own 9-year-old daughter's shot seconds later. What I found really interesting and really what comes to the heart of the Liverpool Echo's front page is the police, and throughout today, the police have been really appealing to the hearts over the minds of the criminal community across Liverpool, really appealing to them to imagine that it was their own 9-year-old daughter, their own 9-year-old sister, that 9-year-old, it might be not a 9-year-old granddaughter, and to say, look, as the front page shows, whose side you're on, you've got to put aside your gang rivalries and help the police find the killer and those responsible. And I think we've also heard today that the real problem that we've had in the past in Liverpool, which has been addressed in the last few years, of this real anti-grass culture that in Liverpool, people staying silent. And we heard that after Rhys Jones's killing, the killer took ages to be brought to justice. I think it was 1.5 years it took until he was convicted. And there's a real danger and concern among the police tonight that anti-grass culture might prevent them from finding the killer in this tragedy as well.
And yet, of course, there is the phrase, isn't there, honour amongst thieves, and the fact that police press conference was really quite powerful. It was very, very strongly worded, and the fact that there has been such public outcry about this. Matt, do you think that it might change anything?
Well, you've got to hope so, haven't you? And there are encouraging signs of the last few years since Rhys Jones's killing that there is more trust in the police and the more trust in police than staying silent. And I think, my own personal instinct is that when you see the heart-wrenching pictures of this 9-year-old girl, and you read the stories of how she was killed last night, so mercilessly around 10 p.m, just opening the door, you really hope that the vast majority of even criminals would help, even anonymously, with a call to the police, and if not the police, then possibly Crime Stoppers.
And Sonia, you mentioned it a little earlier, that the extraordinary timing of it being 15 years to the exact day that Rhys Jones died, and that was a story that also really captured the public imagination, didn't it? And there was a real sense that action was taken after that. There were a lot of organisations that were set up after that. I mean, does this show that those kind of organisations and those initiatives have failed?
Well, there's clearly been a failure in the sense that, this is going on in Liverpool today. And I think there's going to be a lot of reflection. I mean, it shouldn't take the death of a little 9-year-old girl to sort of propel this issue to the front pages and to propel a really kind of serious national conversation. But I think it undoubtedly will now, and I think there will be a lot of reflection on what's gone wrong in sort of, in recent years around policing, around prevention of this sort of gang violence. But really, I think that there will be time for that, and the next decade will all be about trying to establish what happened and trying to bring Olivia's killers to justice. I think the other thing that makes it difficult, and it's very notable that in what the police have said, they've tried to provide reassurances that people coming forward can do so anonymously, that they will be protected, that they will be safe, because there will be, I think, some people who might want to do the right thing but might feel scared as well about retaliation from these gangs if they come forward. So I think those assurances from the police are very, very important indeed.
And final thought on this, Matt. We've talked about the person that did the killing, but the fact that the man who was running away stepped over Olivia as he left the house, and her mother was screaming for help, we understand. But of course, people on the street were too scared to come out of their houses, and rightly so, given what they had just heard. The police making it really clear that they want everybody involved in this attack to be brought to justice.
Absolutely, and that includes the 35-year-old man who burst into the house last night. The quote that's particularly stuck out for me in the Metro from the Assistant Chief Constable there, quoting, "Cowardly individual does not deserve to be walking the streets." And I think what really struck me as really quite a tragic thought was the 35 man who was shot in the chest several times. One of his friends drove a black Audi to pick him up to take him to hospital, but left 9-year-old Olivia and her mum Cheryl, who was also shot as well in the arm, left them on the doorstep, and they had to wait for the ambulance. And who knows whether Olivia might have lived if that man had taken them to hospital in his car as well.
It's just gruesome on every level, isn't it? Sonia and Matt, thank you both very much for talking that through with us. Coming up, though, after the break, stark warnings from the head of Scottish Power as to how much government money it may take to keep households afloat. You stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. With me now, Sonia Sodha and Matt Dathan, taking us through tomorrow's front pages and some of the inside pages as well. Sonia, let's move on to the Financial Times now and away from the dreadful story up in Liverpool. And this is about the cost of living, the cost of shielding families from this fuel bill shock, reckoned to cost as much as £100 billion, according to the FT. It's from one of the largest energy groups, Scottish Power, isn't it?
That's right. So the boss of Scottish Power is estimating that if the government were to freeze energy bills, the energy price cap where it is at the moment for 2 years, that would cost £100 billion over 2 years. Now, that's obviously something similar along the lines of what the opposition, Labour, have said they would do if they were in government. It's a huge amount of money. Just to put it in context, the total value of the coronavirus furlough package that supported people to ensure that people didn't get laid off during the lockdowns, that cost £69 billion. But it really is that scale of support that we're talking about that families need. I mean, this is a financial emergency on the same scale or perhaps even worse than the COVID pandemic. And we've got a Conservative leadership race where actually neither of the candidates are sort of saying firmly what they would do if they were Prime Minister, even though the next massive hike in energy bills is only a few weeks off. It's coming in October. So I think, it's very sobering. And it really should provide food for thought. We've got Liz Truss, who is almost certain to be the next Prime Minister, and she's not committing to any action yet. I just personally don't think that that's good enough. There are obviously questions to be about how this support should be channeled to families. Is the best thing to freeze the energy price cap? Is it to target very significant cash payments at the lowest income families? There are questions about the exact mechanism, but I think there is absolutely absolutely no question that a package of this kind of scale is needed, and it's something we're going to see eventually, I think, from the next Prime Minister. So why aren't they talking about it now?
Yeah, and Matt, Liz Truss is now not talking about an autumn statement, she's talking about a fiscal event. But, any confidence that anything will actually happen as soon as we do get a new Prime Minister, whoever it may be?
Well, I think there is actually increasing confidence that there will be that emergency help or some form of emergency help that she perhaps at the start of the contest was trying to play down expectations. The FT, the Financial Times front page reports that the mood music in government is shifting, and let's remember that the current business secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, is tipped to be the next chancellor, and he's met with the chief executive of Scottish Power over these plans. But I think the details of how it's going to be paid off will probably appall Liz Truss's principles, or at least the principles that she's been touting during the leadership contest, because the proposals suggest paying it off by either general taxation over the next 10 to 15 years, or a rise in bills spread over the next 10 to 15 years. Now, given that Liz Truss is selling herself as the true tax-cutting conservative, I can't imagine her coming to number 10 and one of her first big decisions is to sign up to a plan that will require 15 years worth of taxation. But who knows? And given the scale of the crisis, and we'll see that on Friday with the cap expected to rise to 3,200 from October. The decision is going to be on Friday. The scale of the crisis might require Liz Truss to perhaps dampen some of her core principles.
Yeah. OK, final front page, which we haven't really got time to talk about, but I think it's just worth looking at. Quite a striking front page. City AM, London's business newspaper. There it is. Bad news. Pages 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Good news. Page 1, Crosswell to fully open in November. It means a lot to those in the City of London, doesn't it, that you'll be able to get from east to west relatively quickly. But good to see their take on that news today.